Moses was the leader of the Exodus who led the people of Israelites out of slavery from the land of Egypt. He led God's people through the wilderness, hoping to reach the promised land. There arose not a prophet since in Israel that was great like Moses. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 10. Yet, amidst Moses' greatness, he didn't enter the promised land because God punished him for the disobedience he exhibited at the rock. He had trespassed against God in the wilderness of Zin. He broke faith with God in the presence of the people and so didn't sanctify God or present himself as holy in the face of the Israelites around him. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 51 to 52. The situations where Moses disobeyed God occurred when the Israelites needed water for the second time on their journey from the land of Egypt to the promised land. When the Israelites reached the desert of Zin, they were very thirsty and there was no water. This was around the end of their 40 years journey. They complained and spoke against God, Moses, and Aaron. Numbers 20 verse 3 to 4. Moses and Aaron then went into the tabernacle where the glory of the Lord fell upon them, and where Moses received instructions on what to do regarding the situation of the lack of water. The Lord had told Moses to take his rod, gather the people along with his brother Aaron, and speak to the rock in the presence of the people. God told Moses that if he did this, the rock would bring forth water for them to drink. Moses did as he was instructed. He took his rod and gathered the people together. However, when Moses had gathered the congregation, he asked them, "How now, ye rebels, shall we fetch you water out of this rock?" This statement introduced a sort of doubt and questioning. Before Moses gathered the people, it was told that if he spoke to the rock, water would come out. He had been assured of this by God. Yet, instead of communicating this fact, he came to question them. "Shall we give you water instead of we shall give you water, as the Lord had commanded?" God's clear instruction to Moses was to take the rod and gather the assembly together, and Aaron thy brother, and speak yea unto the rock before thy eyes, and he shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts to drink. From this instruction, we see that Moses was asked to 1. Take his rod, but God didn't tell him to strike it. 2. To assemble the congregation, and 3. To speak to the rock, and it will bring forth water. What Moses did was that 1. He took his rod, 2. Gathered the people together, and 3. Asked people, "Shall we bring forth water for you?" Instead of affirming that water was going to be brought forth in the obedience to God's commandment, and then 4. He struck the rock. The Bible doesn't record that Moses spoke to the rock. What Moses did was that he lifted his hand and smote the rock with his rod, and the water came out abundantly. Numbers 20 verse 11. When God punished Moses as recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 51 to 52, God stated that Moses had not sanctified, set him apart as holy in the presence of the people of Israel, and that he broke faith, disobeyed, didn't act according to God's command in total belief. With him, God was angry that Moses hadn't acted in total obedience and faith towards him. Moses didn't do exactly what God told him to do, probably because he didn't believe that speaking to the rock could be sufficient, or that he would look foolish in the presence of the Israelites if he was speaking to a rock. Why Moses struck the rock instead of speaking to it remains an issue of debate today. Some school of thought suggest that he was angry with the people as earlier stated in Numbers 20 verse 10. And Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation before the rock, and Moses said unto them, "Hear now, ye rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Many people believe that Moses was very angry with the people and he smote the rock out of his anger towards them. This belief is very accepted by many because the immediate verse after Numbers 20 verse 10 records that Moses smote the rock. It therefore appears that Moses was angry with the people. He asked them a question and then, still filled with anger, immediately smote the rock. The first issue would be to clearly state what broke faith with God means. Does it simply mean that Moses disobeyed, or whatsoever reason, and thus it was an act of not fulfilling a faith instruction that God had given to him, or was it that Moses acted out of lack of faith? This issue is still being debated by several scholars. In the case of lack of faith, or Moses not comprehending how possible it was that God would bring water from a rock without him doing anything other than speaking, it would be that Moses smote the rock out of disbelief. It's important to know that Moses was used to doing things to bring result. Earlier, when the Israelites were encamped at Rephidim, where they were very thirsty, and they came to meet Moses, and they even murmured against him, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us, our children and livestock with thirst?" Exodus 17 verse 3. Moses cried unto God because the people were about to stone him, and God commanded him to take some elders and his rod, with which he had smote a river previously, and go to Mount Horeb to smite the rock and get water. Moses obeyed in the sight of the elders of Israel, and they got water. Exodus chapter 17 verse 6 says, "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people may drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Perhaps Moses was very used to doing things. He had parted a river by doing something. He had gotten water by striking a rock once. The issue wasn't that he didn't trust God. He did, but he was used to works. This time was, however, different. God wanted him to trust and rely on him without relying on his works. But Moses wasn't used to this and was unable to do so. While Moses obeyed God in Exodus and smote the rock for the first time, he disobeyed God in Numbers and thus smote the rock the second time. The incidents recorded in Numbers as Moses striking the rock twice was referring to the fact that he had struck the rock twice in total, not that he struck the rock 2 times at that particular time. Numbers 20 verse 11. And Moses lifted his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. The book of 1 Corinthians chapter 10 in the Bible explains that the rock in the desert that Moses had struck was Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 1 to 4. I do not want you to be unaware that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea, and all that ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. In the books of Psalms and Isaiah, Jesus is described as the rock that will be killed, struck for our sake, which when struck will bring forth living waters, salvation. The first time the rock was struck was to indicate that Christ, after paying the sacrifice just once, has paid it all, and that the sacrifice was enough forever. However, Hebrews 10 verse 12 says that after Jesus offered himself as a sacrifice once and forever, he sat at the right hand of God, and therefore no other sacrifice needs to be paid. Moses striking him, the rock, twice misrepresented Christ and suggests that the sacrifice of Christ wasn't enough. God intended that Moses would strike the rock only once, and this rock would go on to be a typology of Jesus Christ. So when Moses struck the rock again, it was misrepresenting the typology God wanted to paint. It said that Moses crucified Christ twice because he struck the rock twice instead of once. The punishment therefore was needed to show that one strike on Jesus was enough. God didn't want to allow Moses' mistake to distort the picture he was creating. Moses was punished so that we wouldn't think there was a need for Christ to be sacrificed repeatedly for the salvation of men. God punished Moses so we could properly understand the picture of the rock. He prevented him from entering the promised land and appointed a new leader, Joshua, Yeshua, meaning Jesus, thereby signifying that we can only attain salvation by Jesus Christ and not by the works of the law. Moses. In conclusion, Moses was therefore punished and barred from entering the promised land because of his actions of disobedience, which could have led to a great misrepresentation of Christ had God not intervened.